Greetings, friends, and welcome to another Midweek Meditation from Christ the King Lutheran Church congregation here in Houston. It's good to be with you again. It's been a couple of weeks. My theme tonight is the healing power of life together, and we certainly know how much we need both some healing and a more robust life together in these difficult days. So I'll address more of that theme in a bit, but one way to get us started is by way of this fine musical meditation from Deacon Rick Erickson, The Heavens Declare, by Benedetto Marcello. And Rick calls it something of a party piece. So let's enjoy and see how that rolls for us. I want to talk a little bit this evening about the healing power of life together, and while that might be a theme that seems immediately correct, its profundity all too often escapes us. And I thought about this again just last night when I had a wonderful conversation over Zoom, what else, with friends and former students from Australia. I taught there in a special class about 3 years ago, and a couple of the students and their teacher reached out to me to meet with them again because they still, wouldn't you know, had significant questions that were generated by our conversations back then, and in particular, a certain theologian by the name of Catherine Tanner. It was such a welcome conversation. It was one of those rare times that come around when we have a depth of conversation that is not usually had with people outside our more immediate relationships. It was such a great gift, all the more, quite frankly, a moment of grace, because one of those students I had written to a bit more than a year ago, thinking that she was about to die. Because she is a brilliant person, but was beset by cerebral palsy. And yet here she was in fine health with another great colleague student from that classroom and her supervisor teacher. It was a marvelous time. A lot of it was around how it is that we negotiate our own suffering lives under some of the classic and very difficult to answer questions about who is God and how is God looking out for us. What does suffering mean in terms of a just God and so forth. We know those questions. I'll come to that a bit later. But it was such a rare gift as I was thinking about the whole time together, because here, ironically, the beauty of communication technology today availed this gift for me and for the four of us in that conversation. 30 years ago, I remember a fine theologian, his name is Michael Welker from Heidelberg, Germany, who wrote about how it was that emerging communication technology would stifle deep relationship, that its whole ambition to cover whole populations in zeros and ones at the speed of light was going to mean something of a shallowness of communication and would indeed make factions out of people instead of bringing us deeply and profoundly together. And in fact, his prediction was right. He was posing communication technology and emerging social media over and against the work of the Holy Spirit, who is about gathering together and providing depth in communication at the same time. It is the rare gift that technology today would go towards such purposes of breadth and depth. Well, I think he was right, as I said, and we've seen that polarization has been one of the key outcomes of social media and the communication technology. We've seen that people being all the more isolated into their own silos, into their own groupings, so that we can even block somebody with whom we so disagree, perhaps, or that bots and trolls would now dominate social media airwaves, again with the speed of light. So to turn everything into argument and make it so difficult for us to have straightforward relationship, all the more compounded now, of course, by the pandemic of COVID-19. We are isolated, and it is difficult for us to communicate at depth. Certainly difficult, if not almost impossible, to communicate with depth and breadth. For the both is indeed a gift of the Holy Spirit. And I thought about that very trenchantly last night after that rare experience of my conversation with my Australian friends. Today, I think social media in many ways is used by what Paul calls the powers and principalities that are bent against social healing. They are bent more toward fracture, as Paul explicitly said, bent even to dividing us from the will of community in Jesus Christ, as Christ would will it for us. Walter Benjamin, another philosopher a couple or 3 generations ago, put it wryly this way, that the freedom of conversation is being lost. If it was earlier a matter of course in conversation to take interest in one's partner, this is now replaced, he continued, by inquiry into the price of one's shoes or umbrella. Well, we know somewhat how that is, because often our mutual inquiry is still fairly flat across the light waves of the media. It might be that we can talk about what's the latest movie we've seen that we'd recommend to others, and that's good if it serves us to deeper conversation. But if we fall, again, to the platitudes, even the political platitudes without deep engagement, then we're not very well off, and our loneliness can be indeed exacerbated. It was Hannah Arendt, a contemporary of Walter Benjamin, who wrote, I think very presently in describing her time, but certainly ours now, that Loneliness is the key lead to the rise of authoritarians and totalitarians. Loneliness is the enemy that we face that becomes the opportunity for authoritarianism and totalitarianism. If we want true intimacy, we've got to work at it. We have to see how it is that we could re-engage a life together that is led by the Holy Spirit. It is an intentional life together that is the place for healing. Of course, it is in life together, a life in community, that we might experience harm. But it is in, perhaps a different community, but it's still in life together that we find healing, and nowhere else can that happen. Because we have to talk it out. We have to parse the terms. We have to be in loving accountability with each other. And that takes a certain amount of initiative on our part. And it certainly takes an initiative on a church's part, like Christ the King Lutheran Church in Houston, to help us all be sustained in life together, in a life that is in community. The solution is life together, where and when prayer is both communal and individual, when prayer, even when we are praying apart, keeps us mindful that we are in the thickness of gathered saints over all time, and that we are in the thickness of gathered saints even very poignantly in this time with each other. Life together is also about living in the thickness, you see, of different gifts and colors, all of it being a testimony to the utter idiosyncrasy and otherness and goodness of each other, but above all, of God. You see, there are many today who want to talk about God as some kind of arbiter of a uniform, similar, call it homogeneous life together, where we all have to take the same steps and think the same things, follow the same rules, and that is just not in the character of God. It is not in the character of the image of God given inside of each and every one of us. It is not the way God would have us live life together. I put it this way in kind of a theological frame, that if God is God, for God to be God and not just some kind of extrapolation of ourselves, God is fully other than we can imagine. God is fully transcendent beyond our wildest imaginations. And God is fully immanent. That is, God is with us down deep in each of our particularities, in each of our idiosyncrasies, in our peculiarness, each and every one of us. God accompanies us in God's Spirit peculiarly in ways that are adequate to each of our unique identities. And God at the same time is God over the all of it, way beyond our imagination. That is the only way that God is God, which then means that God would immunize us in the way we are with each other from totalitarians and from authoritarians, from anyone else who would heteronomously, as we say, impose a law on us that is actually true only to a certain few. God will not have any kind of template trespass on the individual freedom of God's image in you. I was so thinking of that as I was talking with the friends about the suffering of an Australian sufferer of cerebral palsy, and another who's had her trials, and another who has hers, and I who have mine. Whatever the current trial and challenge, it is a big, complex trial and challenge today, compounded by political fracture, emotional exhaustion, and spiritual confusion, even with no little now spiritual combat. I'm inviting you to trust and practice whatever enters your imagination as constituting a life together in this place with your extended friends and relations around the globe. I know I myself have at times not attended to this very urgent and integral principle. My own behaviors, of course, sometimes have been pressed by the anxieties of my own solitary moments, which again are exactly those times when any of us who are so besieged can and will get facts wrong, and that we could make decisions that are both self and community compromising. We have ways here at Christ the King Church of attending to doing better, even by way of this video moment. Ironically now, in light of how I began with a warning about social media, even by way of this video moment, in prayer and hopes that words have depth, we have life together and can make it ever more effective and better. We do it here as, for example, with our online worship, for the time being, with our house churches, which I invite you to check out and gather into. Our many ways of gathering still otherwise online for conversation and education, and now even choir rehearsals. Digital mediation is not a bad thing, and it is not the province of only the evil powers and principalities. Thank God. We thank God because there are ways that we seek out and will employ that even can avail us of conversation over the most awesome distances, bring us into true life together. And God in that, as well as just mystical prayer, it gathers us with our deep peculiarities to be gifts with and for each other. This is, thanks be to God, a key and a keen part, I believe, indeed, of the meaning of our very baptism. You have been baptized into a great community of many peculiar folk, and we seek that out and are enriched by each other in it, and this is the power of the Holy Spirit, who goes broad and goes deep. Thanks be to God.